Money. Some worship it like a god, building altars of bank statements and investment portfolios. Some fear it like a demon, convinced that wealth corrupts everything it touches. Some think they control it with sophisticated spreadsheets, complex strategies, and carefully calculated risk assessments. But most people are completely controlled by it, dancing to its rhythm without even knowing the song, making decisions they think are logical when they're actually driven by unconscious forces they've never examined. You may think money is just currency, transactions, financial freedom, numbers in your bank account that determine your worth and your future potential. Perhaps you see it as security, as options, as the key that unlocks the life you've always imagined living. But according to the deepest thinkers in human history, philosophers and psychologists who spent their lives mapping the hidden territories of the human psyche, money is actually our modern mirror of the soul, reflecting back to us our deepest fears, our most desperate needs, and our most carefully hidden shadows. This is the story of money's shadow, the invisible psychological forces that drive every financial decision you make, and why understanding these forces reveals more about your psyche than your bank account ever could. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see every dollar you earn, every purchase you make, and every financial decision you've ever justified to yourself in the quiet moments when nobody else is listening. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist who first mapped the vast territories of the human unconscious, discovered something extraordinary about money that most people never realize, something that explains why perfectly intelligent individuals make seemingly irrational financial decisions again and again. Every single person walking this planet carries what he called a money complex, an invisible web of unconscious emotions, beliefs, compulsions, and inherited patterns that controls their financial behavior far more powerfully than any logical strategy or rational plan ever could. This complex operates completely below the threshold of consciousness, making decisions for you before your rational mind even knows there's a choice to be made. Your relationship with money was shaped before you could even count to 10, before you understood what a dollar was worth, before you had any conscious thoughts about wealth or poverty or what it means to be financially secure. The neural pathways that determine how you feel about earning, spending, saving, and investing were carved deep into your brain during those crucial early years when you were absorbing everything around you like a sponge, creating patterns that would influence every financial decision for the rest of your life. If your parents fought about money behind closed doors, their voices tense with anxiety and resentment, you likely developed one of two unconscious responses that still control you today. You either hoard money compulsively, never feeling truly safe no matter how much you accumulate in your accounts, always convinced that disaster lurks around the next corner, or you spend it recklessly, unconsciously, trying to eliminate the source of conflict by making sure money never stays around long enough to create tension. If wealth felt dangerous in your childhood home, if rich people were spoken about with suspicion and resentment, if success was viewed as inherently corrupt or selfish, you will unconsciously sabotage your own financial success every single time you get close to a significant breakthrough. If money represented love in your family system, if gifts and treats and expensive experiences were how affection was demonstrated rather than through presence and attention, you'll chase wealth not for security or freedom, but for the deep psychological feeling of being worthy of love and care. Jung realized something profound about this invisible force when he wrote, "Energy only works when accumulated. Its energy is money." He wasn't talking about compound interest or investment returns or any conventional financial principle. He was talking about life force itself, the very energy that animates your existence and gives you the power to create and influence the world around you, crystallizing into the thing we call money. Here's what Jung discovered that will completely blow your mind and change how you see every financial transaction for the rest of your life. Money is crystallized psychic energy. Every single dollar you earn represents a piece of your life force, your attention, your creative power, your time on this earth, converted into a symbol of value that can be exchanged for other forms of energy. When you work for money, you're literally trading the most precious resource you have, your consciousness, your presence, your ability to think and feel and create, for tokens that represent that energy in condensed form. But here's the devastating paradox that explains why so many wealthy people feel spiritually bankrupt, why success often feels hollow, why achieving financial goals rarely brings the satisfaction people expect. The same energy you use to make money is the exact same energy you need to develop your soul, to become who you're truly meant to be, to create meaning and connection and inner fulfillment, to build relationships that nourish you and pursue activities that make you feel fully alive. There's only so much psychic energy available to any human being in a given day, week, month, or lifetime. When you pour all of that energy outward into building wealth, climbing hierarchies, accumulating possessions, and constructing an impressive external identity, you necessarily starve the inner dimensions of your existence. This explains why so many successful entrepreneurs, after building massive fortunes and achieving everything society told them they should want, describe feeling empty, hollow, like they've won a game that ultimately doesn't matter, like they've traded their essential self for symbols that can't actually nourish the soul. A groundbreaking longitudinal study conducted by researchers at Princeton followed 1,000 self-made millionaires for 5 years after they reached their first $1 million. The results were shocking and completely contradicted everything we're told about wealth and happiness. 73% reported feeling significantly more anxious after achieving wealth than they had before reaching that milestone. They expected relief, security, happiness, a sense of having finally made it to safety. Instead, they found new fears they'd never imagined, bigger problems that required even more energy to solve, and a gnawing sense that they had traded something essential and irreplaceable for something that was ultimately meaningless. The statistics get even darker when you look at the psychological cost of extreme wealth. The richest 1% of the population have suicide rates 30% higher than the general population. These are people who solved the money game completely, who have everything our culture tells us we should want: unlimited options, financial security, the ability to buy anything and go anywhere and do whatever they desire. Yet they're statistically more likely to take their own lives than someone struggling paycheck to paycheck, worrying about rent and groceries and basic survival needs. Why does this happen? Because they poured all their life energy outward into building wealth and status and external validation, while completely neglecting the inner work that actually creates fulfillment, meaning, and psychological wholeness. They became rich in their bank accounts and desperately bankrupt in their souls. 150 years ago, Friedrich Nietzsche, perhaps the most psychologically penetrating philosopher who ever lived, saw this exact trap coming and tried desperately to warn us about what would happen when human beings gained access to unprecedented wealth and power without corresponding spiritual development. He wrote something that should chill every ambitious person to the bone, a warning that predicted exactly the psychological epidemic we're witnessing today among the wealthy elite. Only he who has spirit ought to have possessions. Otherwise, possessions are a public danger. Nietzsche understood with crystal clarity that without inner development, without spiritual strength, without knowing who you truly are beneath all your roles and achievements and social masks, wealth becomes a prison rather than freedom, a substitute identity rather than a tool for authentic expression. It becomes a drug that needs increasingly larger doses to provide the same psychological relief, a false self that demands constant feeding and validation and protection from threats both real and imagined. He also warned us about the psychological mechanism that creates the endless chase, the reason why people who achieve their financial goals immediately set new ones, why lottery winners become addicted to buying more tickets, why billionaires continue scheming to make more billions when they already have more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. The possessor who does not know how to use free time will always continue to strive after possessions. He knows no other way. This is why lottery winners, people who receive massive windfalls without having to develop themselves in any way to earn that money, often become significantly more depressed 5 years after winning than they were before their windfall. This is why celebrities with hundreds of millions of dollars still feel desperately insecure, still chase more fame, more money, more validation, more proof that they matter and deserve to exist. Without spirit, without inner work, without developing the psychological muscles that create genuine self-worth, money creates an addiction cycle that gets stronger and more demanding with every hit of success. You think reaching the next financial milestone will finally give you the peace and security you crave, but instead, it just raises the bar higher, creates bigger fears about losing what you've gained, and demands even greater sacrifices of your authentic self to maintain and grow your external achievements. Let me tell you about John Richardson, though that's not his real name, because he's still alive and this story could destroy what remains of his reputation if his identity were revealed. John was a hedge fund genius, the kind of person financial magazines put on covers with headlines like The Midas Touch and Wall Street's Golden Boy, and The Man Who Never Makes a Bad Bet. By age 35, he was worth $50 million, living in a Manhattan penthouse that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, driving cars worth more than the median house price in America, wearing watches that could fund a small non-profit for a year. From the outside, John had everything. He was invited to exclusive parties with celebrities and politicians. He had access to private jets and luxury resorts and investment opportunities that ordinary people never even hear about. He could buy anything he wanted, go anywhere he desired, meet anyone he chose to pursue. He worked 80-hour weeks, sometimes sleeping in his office for days at a time during particularly intense trading periods. He missed his children's birthdays, school plays, bedtime stories, the small daily moments that actually create the texture of family life. He destroyed 2 marriages, not through infidelity or dramatic betrayals, but through the slow erosion that happens when success becomes more important than presence, when building wealth takes priority over building relationships. He told himself it was all worth it because he was building security for his family, creating generational wealth, ensuring that his children would never have to worry about money the way he had worried about it growing up in a middle-class household where financial anxiety was a constant background hum. "I'll stop when I hit 100 million, he promised his second wife as she packed her bags and prepared to take the children to live with her parents. "Just give me 2 more years to reach that goal, and then we can have the life we always talked about." But something strange happened when John hit $100 million. Instead of feeling satisfied or ready to slow down, the goal mysteriously moved to 200 million. The same psychological mechanisms that had driven him to 50 million, then to 100 million, were still operating at full power. When he reached 200 million, it became 500 million. The goalposts kept moving because the underlying psychological wound that was driving all this accumulation had never been addressed or healed. At $500 million, something inside John snapped completely. He couldn't sleep more than 2 hours at a time. He couldn't eat without feeling nauseous. He couldn't find joy in anything, not in his achievements, not in his possessions, not in the respect and envy he saw in other people's eyes when they learned about his wealth. His children, now teenagers, barely knew him as anything more than a source of expensive gifts and college tuition payments. His friends were just other extremely rich men competing to see who could spend more money on toys and experiences they didn't actually need or enjoy. One night, sitting alone in his penthouse worth more than the GDP of a small country, surrounded by art and furniture and technology that represented the pinnacle of human craftsmanship and luxury, John had what he later called his golden breakdown. He realized with crystal clarity, in a moment of psychological transparency that cut through decades of self-deception, that he wasn't chasing wealth at all. He had never been chasing wealth. He was running as fast as he could possibly run from a deep primal fear of being worthless, of being nobody, of not mattering in any meaningful way to anyone or anything in the universe. The money wasn't making him rich in any sense that actually mattered. It was making him poor in every dimension that creates a life worth living. Connection, purpose, presence, authenticity, the ability to be vulnerable and real with the people who claim to love him. Here's what nobody tells you about wealth, what the financial gurus and success coaches and motivational speakers conveniently ignore because it would undermine their entire business model. Money splits your psyche in half, creating what Jung called a dangerous and potentially devastating psychological division that can destroy everything that makes life worth living if it's not consciously addressed and carefully managed. Your outer self, your public persona, your social identity, gets stronger and more powerful with every dollar you accumulate. You gain confidence in business situations, access to opportunities that were invisible when you were struggling financially, the ability to influence and control your environment in ways that would have been impossible before wealth entered your life. People treat you differently when you're rich, with more respect, more deference, more willingness to listen to your opinions and take your suggestions seriously. Doors open that were permanently closed before. Problems that once seemed impossible to solve become merely expensive to solve. You can hire experts, buy solutions, purchase outcomes that used to require luck or connections or years of patient work. But simultaneously, and this is the part that nobody warns you about, your inner self, your authentic core, your connection to who you really are when nobody's watching and nothing depends on your performance, gets weaker and more fragmented with every external success. Your ability to be vulnerable and real with other people diminishes because you're never sure if they like you or your money. Your sense of what you actually feel about anything becomes clouded because you can afford to buy your way out of discomfort before you have to fully experience it. Your connection to your own values and priorities gets confused because you can afford to pursue so many different paths that you lose track of which ones actually matter to you personally. Jung observed this pattern in every single successful patient he treated over his 50-year career. The more external power and wealth they gained, the more internal power and authenticity they lost, until they were essentially successful strangers to themselves, playing elaborate roles they no longer remembered consciously choosing, trapped inside identities that felt foreign and exhausting to maintain. The happiest wealthy people Jung studied, the ones who maintained psychological wholeness and life satisfaction despite accumulating significant external success, had one thing in common that distinguished them from their miserable counterparts. They spent equal time making money and making meaning. For every hour they devoted to external accumulation, building wealth and status and professional achievement, they devoted at least an equal amount of time to internal cultivation, meditation, therapy, creative expression, meaningful relationships, philosophical inquiry, service to causes greater than their personal advancement. They understood intuitively what Jung had discovered through decades of research, that wealth without wisdom is just expensive ignorance, that power without purpose is just sophisticated emptiness, that external success without internal development is a recipe for psychological disaster. For 30 years, Carl Jung conducted one of the most fascinating psychological experiments in history, though he probably didn't think of it as an experiment at the time. He systematically analyzed over 10,000 dreams about money from patients around the world, looking for patterns in how the unconscious mind processes wealth, poverty, financial success, and economic anxiety. What he found will completely change how you think about every financial decision you make for the rest of your life. 99% of dreams that appeared to be about money were actually about something else entirely. The unconscious mind was using money symbols to represent much deeper psychological needs and conflicts that the dreamer couldn't address directly. Power, safety, self-worth, love, recognition, control, freedom from existential anxiety about death, and meaninglessness. The dreamers were using currency and wealth symbols to process fundamental questions about their value as human beings, their place in the social hierarchy, their ability to take care of themselves and the people they loved. Their unconscious minds were trying to communicate something crucial, that no amount of external wealth could fill their internal poverty, that they were attempting to solve soul problems with bank account solutions, that the real work they needed to do had nothing to do with making more money and everything to do with developing their inner resources. But here's the fascinating and revealing part that Jung found most significant. The 1% of dreams that were actually about money itself, not symbols or metaphors or psychological substitutes, but literal financial concerns and practical money matters, came exclusively from people who had already achieved what Jung called financial individuation. Not because they were necessarily the richest people in his patient population, though some of them were quite wealthy, but because they had successfully resolved their money complex through years of inner work and psychological development. Money had become just a tool for them, a neutral medium of exchange that they could use skillfully without being emotionally triggered or psychologically hijacked by financial decisions. It was no longer connected to their identity, their self-worth, their sense of safety in the world, or their ability to feel loved and valued by other people. This explains one of the most consistent and puzzling findings in psychology research over the past 50 years. Lottery winners, people who receive massive financial windfalls without having to work or develop themselves in any way to earn that money, are statistically more depressed, more anxious, and more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol 5 years after winning than they were before their windfall. They received external wealth without doing any internal work, and their psyche rebelled against the imbalance like an immune system rejecting a foreign organ transplant. The money felt unearned, undeserved, disconnected from their sense of identity and personal capability. Instead of solving their problems, it created entirely new categories of problems they had never imagined. Family members and friends who suddenly treated them differently, the burden of making investment decisions they weren't prepared for, the psychological pressure of trying to figure out what they actually wanted from life when money was no longer a limiting factor. Jung called this phenomenon golden misery, having everything money can buy while feeling poorer than ever inside, more disconnected from authentic satisfaction and meaningful purpose than people who struggle financially but maintain psychological coherence and spiritual vitality. The external wealth actually made their internal poverty more obvious, more painful, more impossible to ignore, with the kind of busy work and achievement-focused distractions that keep most people from confronting the deeper questions about what makes life worth living. Friedrich Nietzsche made a crucial distinction that most people completely miss, a difference that determines whether money will ultimately liberate you or imprison you, whether wealth will serve your authentic development or corrupt everything that makes you who you really are beneath all your social roles and professional achievements. He distinguished between what he called authentic wealth and performative wealth, between money that flows from and supports your deepest values and money that betrays and undermines everything you claim to believe about what makes life meaningful. Authentic wealth grows organically from your core identity, your genuine talents and gifts, your real contribution to the world, and the unique value you can provide to other human beings. It feels aligned and sustainable and meaningful, even when it's difficult to earn, even when the process requires sacrifice and delayed gratification and years of patient development. It doesn't corrupt you or change your fundamental character because it's actually an expression of who you truly are, rather than a mask you wear to impress others or a drug you use to numb psychological pain. When you earn money authentically, the process itself develops you as a person, strengthens your character, connects you more deeply to your values and priorities, and increases your capacity to serve something greater than your own comfort and security. Performative wealth, on the other hand, exists primarily to impress others, to mask insecurity and self-doubt, to buy belonging in social groups that don't actually accept or value you as an individual, to create an illusion of success and importance that compensates for a deep sense of inadequacy and meaninglessness. It feels hollow and unsustainable even when you're succeeding financially, because deep down you know you're playing a character rather than living as yourself, building an elaborate facade rather than developing genuine capability and worth. The psychological cost of performative wealth is enormous because it requires you to constantly monitor and maintain an image that doesn't reflect your authentic self, to make decisions based on how they'll appear to others rather than whether they align with your actual values and desires. The man buying a Rolex watch to feel important and successful is psychologically poorer than the teacher who chose meaningful work over high income, because at least the teacher's bank account accurately reflects his priorities and his financial situation doesn't contradict his stated values. The woman driving a luxury car she can't actually afford to maintain, funded by credit cards and loans that keep her trapped in financial anxiety, is more genuinely bankrupt than the artist living simply while pursuing her creative calling, because the artist's modest lifestyle supports her authentic goals, while the woman's expensive lifestyle actively undermines her financial security and psychological well-being. Nietzsche wrote, "A casual stroll through the lunatic asylum shows that faith does not prove anything," but he might as well have written it about any expensive shopping district in any major city, where you can observe people frantically buying symbols of success they can't afford, trying to purchase an identity they haven't earned, hoping desperately that external performances will somehow convince their internal critic that they matter and deserve to exist and take up space in the world. True wealth, according to Nietzsche, isn't what you own or how much your possessions cost or how impressive your lifestyle appears to observers. True wealth is whether what you own serves who you're becoming, whether your financial choices move you closer to or further from your authentic self, whether your relationship with money supports your highest potential or keeps you trapped in patterns of self-betrayal and spiritual compromise. Remember the legend of Faust, the brilliant scholar who made a deal with the devil, trading his immortal soul for unlimited knowledge, power, and worldly pleasure. Goethe's masterpiece wasn't just a story or a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. It was a psychological blueprint, a precise map of what happens when human beings trade their essence, their authentic core, their connection to what's sacred and meaningful, for external achievements that promise to make them happier, safer, more important, or more worthy of love and respect. Every single financial decision you make, from the smallest daily purchase to the largest investment or career choice, is fundamentally a Faustian bargain. You trade something of yourself, your time, your energy, your attention, your values, your relationships, your peace of mind, your connection to activities and people and experiences that actually nourish your soul, for something external, something measurable, something that promises to improve your life in ways that can be quantified and compared to other people's achievements. The question isn't whether you'll pay a price for financial success. You always pay a price. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transformed, and the energy you put into making money has to come from somewhere else in your life. The question is whether you'll pay that price consciously, whether you'll deliberately choose what you sacrifice rather than unconsciously giving up things that matter more than money, whether the trade you're making actually serves your long-term flourishing or just your short-term anxiety about security and status. Working 60 hours a week instead of 40 might earn you double the income, but it costs you presence with your family, energy for maintaining your physical health, time for the relationships and hobbies and creative pursuits that actually feed your soul and keep you connected to who you are when you're not performing a professional role. That's the real price, not just the opportunity cost in economic terms that a financial advisor might calculate for you, but the human cost in terms of who you become versus who you could have been if you had made different choices about how to spend the irreplaceable resource of your attention and life force. Chasing status symbols and luxury goods costs you authenticity, because you have to present a version of yourself that's designed to impress others rather than expressing your genuine preferences and values. Money that comes from work you hate or business practices that violate your conscience costs you your integrity. The psychological coherence that comes from knowing your external actions align with your internal values. Wealth built on work that drains rather than energizes you costs you your vitality, your natural enthusiasm, your connection to the activities and purposes that make you feel fully alive and grateful to be conscious in this particular moment. The tragedy of our culture isn't that people make these trades between money and meaning. The tragedy is that most people make them unconsciously, driven by social conditioning and unconscious fears they've never examined, then spend years wondering why success feels so empty, why achievement feels so hollow, why having everything they thought they wanted leaves them feeling like they have nothing that actually matters, in any ultimate sense. They win the game society told them to play, then discover it was never the game they actually wanted to win. Carl Jung's final and most profound insight about money provides the complete solution to everything we've discussed, a path to healing the devastating split between wealth and worth, between having impressive possessions and being an authentic human being who feels genuinely satisfied with their life. He called this process individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who society expects you to be, integrating all the different parts of yourself instead of rejecting the aspects that seem inconvenient or socially unacceptable, developing a conscious relationship with both your light and your shadow instead of projecting your denied qualities onto external goals and achievements. Financial individuation means making money decisions from your authentic self rather than your frightened ego, from your genuine values rather than inherited social programming about what success should look like, from your actual needs and desires rather than manufactured wants created by marketing and social comparison. and the endless cultural pressure to prove your worth through accumulation and consumption. It means developing the psychological skill to pause before every significant financial choice and ask yourself the crucial question that can transform your entire relationship with money. Does this decision help me become more myself, or does it require me to betray some essential aspect of who I really am? Does this choice serve my highest potential and deepest values, or does it primarily serve my fears about not being safe, important, or worthy of love? When you know who you are at the deepest level, when you've done the difficult inner work to integrate your shadow and understand your unconscious patterns and resolve the childhood wounds that drive compulsive behavior around money, wealth becomes what it was always meant to be: crystallized energy in service of consciousness, a tool for expressing your unique gifts and serving something greater than your personal comfort and security. You stop trying to earn your worth through external achievements and start expressing the worth you've discovered through inner work. You stop trying to buy an identity through possessions and lifestyle choices and start being the person you've developed the courage to become through facing your fears and integrating your psychological shadows. You stop using money to fill holes in your psyche and start using it to build bridges between your inner vision and outer expression, between your authentic self and your meaningful contribution to the world. The goal of financial individuation isn't to eliminate money from your life or to live in poverty as some kind of spiritual statement. Money is fundamentally neutral, just crystallized energy waiting to be directed toward whatever purposes you choose. The goal is to eliminate money from your identity, to completely separate your net worth from your self-worth, your bank balance from your psychological balance, your external accumulations from your internal sense of value and purpose. When you achieve genuine financial individuation, something miraculous happens. You can be wealthy without being corrupted by wealth, successful without losing your soul to success, prosperous in both the material and spiritual dimensions of existence without having to choose between them or sacrifice one for the other. And paradoxically, when you stop chasing money to fill psychological holes and start pursuing it as a tool for authentic expression and meaningful service, money often flows more easily and abundantly than it ever did when you were desperately trying to accumulate it for unconscious psychological reasons. You stop radiating the desperate energy of need that actually repels abundance, and you start embodying the calm confidence and clear purpose that naturally attracts the resources necessary to fulfill your authentic vision for your life. If this perspective on money and wealth resonates with you, if you're ready to explore the deeper psychology behind success and achievement in ways that most people never consider, ways that could completely transform not just your financial life, but your entire relationship with yourself and what makes existence meaningful, then you're going to love what we dive into next. Subscribe to join us as we continue exploring the hidden dimensions of the human experience, the psychological forces that shape our lives, and the ancient wisdom that can guide us toward authentic fulfillment in a world obsessed with external achievement.